This is basically a brainstorming session and a dialogue session as well for creating the artisanal knowledge repository. So the first module that we can discuss is frameworks and models, especially with regards to systemic change. So the questions are, I'll just read them out to you and then we can just plunge into discussion, which is what systemic change do we need and why does education need to be regenerative? Are there some core principles that should guide this regenerative education frame? The second aspect is that of regenerative education in the context of indigenous knowledge systems. So, on one hand, why does education need to be regenerative? What are core principles? And second is, if we are talking of regenerative education, what does it mean in the context of indigenous knowledge systems? And what role can community elders, artisans, cultural practitioners play in co creating these frameworks? So, Radhika, would you like to go first?
Sure. So, on my own senses, I'll address the second one, that what role can indigenous artisans play and why that is important. To me, it feels that indigenous communities really are very connected with their community, with each other, with nature, where we came from, and not losing that context, even in education, even in learning. And that is, I think, something we lose. I shared about the Ajanta caves, but for me, what really anchors is I visited the Red Rock Desert of Australia, where seeing how in the Uluru live. They, for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, they've been painting on the same rocks in the caves. Beautiful stories, paintings, and painting over the same painting again and again as a way of teaching. And to me, that so symbolizes regeneration. Is it a painting of today? Is it a painting of 5,000, 10,000 years ago? And that it is a live painting of sorts, and it is a tool for teaching where everyone engages together with art, storytelling, and that live wall. And that, I think, is something we are maybe with AI and such figuring out how we bring that back. Right now, education has become so siloed, and so at some level uninteresting. It's not fun and it's not multidimensional, connected to our day-to-day lives. So that, and connected to nature above all. So that's my response to that second part. And to the first part, yes, absolutely. I think some frameworks and kind of how we do this is very important, but I will let others react to that. We have academics like the brilliant Nelly here who's probably do better job on frameworks than me.
Diego, Nelly,
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I think taking on Raika's approach and like education and looking at how, like ancestral knowledge has been passed on by generations. I always see how, we in the foundation we take to look at biomimicry, for example, and how nature actually works and what are things that we can reproduce and related to the built environment, for example, with Nelly, we had a paper in the foundation that was written last year, where we talked about like how we can actually start regenerating and use materials that are, better or for the environment and rewilder the environment and think about that long-term approach as most of the civilizations used to think about. They're not here just for, live in the moment, which a lot of people think with technology and with our fast-paced lives, but they're thinking about the future generations. And I think that's one of the things that we need to change. The other one is in terms of systemic change. And this is something that, for example, we're not good in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is actually looking at specific context and where you're like trying to create change within a community and what are like the specific leverage points in looking at the systemic thinking approach. That you can actually start moving around and creating. And I think one of the main things, and every time that we come to all this systemic approaches, they all come down to education. Why people are not engaging anymore. For example, in regenerative agriculture, we've seen that a lot of farmers, they're losing the next generations because they don't see a future in farming or in agriculture. and that's because they you know, the way that the economy is evolving, it's taken them apart, and it's not actually sustainable, not profitable for them. So that's something that it's really difficult to maintain if they're struggling economically.
I would like to add that one of the problems are, I would say, issues with the current education framework is that it is not rooted. And I would just like to draw up an example of what we call the master or the ustadji, which actually means, sensei perhaps, of the Benares Varanasi silk weavers. Now, these are weavers who have traditional artisanal skills, and they weave silk, traditional Indian silks. And the silk comes to them graded, the and it's graded in an industrial process, and they also get, gold and silver threads called zaris, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, the qualification of the, final art or the material which got hand woven by the artisans was actually determined by the masterji. The master sat, and he would ask each weaver to come and just, weigh, splash out the length of silk, and he would go over it inch by inch. And I asked him what is it that he is checking, and why don't you, wasn't the silk already, graded as per an industrial process? He said, yes, that's one level of grading, but the final grading is being done by me. And that grading is what determined actually the price of each piece. And I asked him, he says, it's so many factors together, and it's rooted in, the time spent by the weaver, the artisan on the material, his skill sets, his his ability to transform a design into actual piece of art. And it cannot be quantified, it cannot be standardized. Now, and that is rooted in, that person's experience of seeing such pieces over the last 40 years. And it also has to do with, the ability of the person. Now, this I don't know. I have never seen any traditional, the current education frameworks which are doing it. Perhaps, this is what is lacking, and this is, if this can be the kind of systemic change which brings in, out there, that was dependent on one human being, and he actually decided on the prices of the pieces of art. So can AI help, transmit this knowledge, this traditional wisdom? I wonder if it can do so. And I think this is maybe a principle which any change we need to build brings in. It has to be rooted in the context and in the culture, in the traditions of what we want, the future generations to harness.
That's very interesting argument, right? Because it's rooted in so many factors, cultural factors, things that are very difficult to measure, right? It's like intangibles.
Yes.
That through his experience and through years of seeing so many different examples, he's able to judge the different aspects of what it means to create value, right? I think that's a question of value generation.
Yes.
And how to measure that. And that's something that we want to do with art, like that it's so difficult, and it's something that artisans bring to the table, right? It's that value added aspect, the creativity aspect that might be very difficult to measure with AI and train AI models to appreciate, because it's so in my opinion, so inherently human. But at the same time, I think that AI does have the opportunity to support other aspects, maybe of the process of getting artisans up to speed, of helping them understand how to connect to global markets. So there's other aspects, I think, where AI might be more suited. So I think we have to map those uses, right? Those uses where AI can help artisans, and also where the process needs to be kept maybe as is because it's working correctly.
I will be a bit contrarian and
Okay.
challenge you both and say that I view AI not as a replacement for humans, but augmenting the human being, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes when everything is on one person, that is also a challenge, even if it's ancestral way. One, it creates a hierarchy, right? Second, it is sometimes not that efficient. My own instinct from what I have seen AI do is perhaps it can help this person be more efficient, maybe if not everything it does, by like the AI I mentioned in the digital butler learns, maybe it can learn how where AI is going now. I think it can at least partially learn from this person how they're doing it if they articulate it and do the first pre-screening maybe. And then that human being can be the last one. Maybe it can even help articulate what is it that human being is doing that seems like this magic, and others can be included in that perhaps. So I am optimistic. Now there is an ethical issue of do we want to do that, right? And are we going to then take away livelihood from so many people? That's a different matter. But I think the speed at which AI is evolving and learning, I think at least at a partial level, being able to do what we are talking about is not out of the realms of reality, is my instinct. I think then the question is, one of the things that does really concern me, I mean, just my husband who works in the tech world, he was saying the other day that, wow, like code that was written for years and years over many teams, he was playing with some of these auto generation stuff now where they are. It generates just a little bit of criteria, half an hour of criteria specifying, it produce almost the same code instantly, right? And it is the harsh reality. And how can we turn that into this opportunity rather than a crisis where it only increases more inequalities? To me, the question, I do think it's very possible it can do the kind of things at least reasonably well. And how can we make it a helper, augmenter rather than the substitute?
So, which brings us actually to the next point in the discussion, which is that learning and knowledge transmission. Fundamentally, the Ustad ji there had a certain way of knowledge transmission, and and you, Radhika, just added saying that perhaps it can be a tool which this indigenous knowledge can be recorded or make him more efficient and ensure that it gets transmitted. But would you say that, AI can also help, say, experiential learning? I mean, just not Radhika, I mean, the others in the discussion also. We haven't heard from, say, Sylvia or Otto here. So would you say that experiential learning can also be integrated using AI? What do the others feel in this room? Because that is something which, in my mind, I'm unable to figure out, how education can actually help experiential learning, the touch and feel of, artisanal output.
Different students have very different learning styles. Some people are more visual, others are more verbal, others learn from already have a lot of knowledge, others come with very little knowledge. So something that we've been tinkering with, it is not, we haven't tinkered with incorporating indigenous knowledge, but just the process of learning through using these LLMs. Actually, we've been creating personalized GPTs to help students. So at the beginning, we will ask them about their preference in learning styles, and then based on what we want to teach, then it will create a different learning process based on the answers from the students. So I think that is an example that can be incorporated into this kind of system where we can understand the different learning styles. I think that all humans have different ways of learning, different speeds of learning, and it's something that can be incorporated into this personalized learning assistants that really help people learn based on their own preferences.
Are there any other global models or indigenous education models that can, be something on which the AI model can be trained on? Because here, if we are wanting to do systemic change, it cannot be, just some kind of iterative or, incremental change using the traditional knowledge framework that we have. I mean, it's a very top heavy, I mean, top down, heavy on, single one person to many person kind of, education, which is the traditional, which is what the universities nowadays have been till today. So if we are looking at, a different model, which is, far more learner focused and it's more interactive, are there any, other indigenous models which can act as, say, perhaps a model from which we can, learn, we can train AI models on? Do we know of any? I mean, I can't think up of anything which is right now which comes to my mind, and I've been thinking about it for the last 3, 4 days actually. So,
I, I would say, and I know me and Nelly are being vocal, but I do think there are aspects that we could bring in. I think it's called Ubuntu, if I remember right. There is an indigenous way of living. I mean, not thinking just education classically and learning models, but a way of living in African indigenous communities, where it is a way of thinking of the collective always. There isn't even the concept of competition and the antithesis. It's a beautiful concept. And it is not there in today's world. The way we learn is all about competition and who's first. And we don't think of the collective anywhere close to what the spirit of Ubuntu is. And yet we know from those examples, we are capable as human beings living that way if we grew up and learned in such models. And I wonder if that, saying things like that, AI can help us rapidly pick up that concept and bring it into classrooms. And to your earlier question, Shobha, I have been in classes where always hearing something in experiential way from a protagonist really makes learning easier, a storytelling narrative style. And I have been in education classes or seminars where with AI, now the same point is being made in a scenario with an avatar who's a protagonist.
mm,
And some of them have been about bias training and reading about bias. And a story is very different from even if it's a artificial avatar.
mm,
Hearing a dialogue between two protagonists is it transforms how you absorb and learn. And these are okay, a bit cartoonish avatars, but there's no reason they can't be even more realistic looking. So I do think even in experiential learning, there is a big role in multiple ways, but of course no substitute. And then I would say also there is a lot in our traditions. We talked of ancestral knowledge. These caves I went to, Ajanta, they're blurred, they're layers and layers of stories. I think AI can help us forgotten languages rapidly. AI is already helping us kind of
yeah.
decipher ancient languages. What is in this art? That's layers and layers. Even all of that, and then bringing that into experiential learning, augmenting what the teacher teaches in the classroom. Again, augmenting, I think there's a powerful role even in experiential learning. Of course, there's no substitute for visiting the indigenous village in the high Andes, right? But it can take you halfway there for those who can't go there, or even more, perhaps.
Thank you,
I think the
Radhika.
challenge is how do we not let the biases creep in
Yes.
when these things are being created, right? Because who creates it, what is the data can affect what comes out. And that to me, can it do it is less the concern so much as can we do it in a manner that doesn't cause more harm than good.
True. Because what we do learn is what, somebody codified us, somebody just transcribed, and that person's bias is what gets carried through the ages. And that is so true. The fact is, that's the most important thing that I can think of. The next point that I would like to talk about is, keeping this in mind, do we really think that AI can be culturally responsive? Because my experience has been that at the end of the day, technology flattens things. I'm sorry if I'm being provocative here, but that has been, it kind of, codifies everything. This is standardization which has happened, and we see that, there's a certain flatness which comes in, and and indigenous knowledge traditions are all about, it's so responsive, it's tuned to the person and sitting in front of you. There are no standard bytes which are being, fed to the person. So would AI be, so responsive to the learner's skill sets and, create personalized learning paths? For me, it's a question still, I would say not answered very well. What does the group think?
Sylvia, Otto, do you want have responses? Me and Nelly have lots to say, looks like, but we want to not take away time from you. You haven't spoken.
Actually, I should admit that I have many gaps in this topic, so I'm just listening to you.
Yes, same here. Thank you.
I would then react saying that I personally think AI is just a tool. It's a very powerful tool. It will do what we teach it to do, right? So I think we can make it be very personally, the points Nelly made, extremely, even more than is possible today, personally and culturally responsive. If that's the data we're given, that's how we design it. And that I think is doable. The question is, I think also one of the unanswered question is, as a recipient, does it dehumanize it, like taking away the human touch, right? And we are socially for hundreds of thousands of years socialized to learn from other human beings. And yet the other day I saw that now you can actually touch and feel a hologram. So as that boundary is blurring, now if you see someone, you can touch and feel, then is that going to be as experiential? Almost there. And I think to your point of flattening, you do raise a very good point, Shobha, that as Mahatma Gandhi said, there is beauty in diversity. And if we are not careful, will we homogenize too much that everything is just very boring and it's all the same? And but I think normalizing standards and making sure that the AI does a good job and do ethical job is a bit different than does it become the same for everybody, right? And those are two different dimensions of homogenizing. And I think both are possible. I think the challenge is, are the incentives there in society to design it to be culturally responsive, technologically adaptive, or is the profit motive going to take it where it's like most efficient and makes most money for a few? That is the challenge of our times. And maybe it'd be interesting to hear how the foundation world views this, Diego.
Yeah, no, that totally. I think, when we try to make companies talk together about what the circular economy means, every one of them talks about like from their perspective. And yeah, we come to like, okay, should we standardize or just harmonize and maybe make it interoperable? But as you said, like it's difficult when you have this capital commoditizing approach, standardizing. What does that mean? And also even from an AI point of view, when we explore the implications of that from just like the training of the different AI agents, what's like the decision making that's behind that bias? Is it helpful in a way? Can we see what are the implications? Because we've been trying to implement as well AI agents to decide what companies might be more circular than others. And at some point, we do have to come and compare the different AI to see what are like the implications of the systems there. And of course, it's basically how they're designed. But also, like we need to realize what are some control points and realize a little bit what's the thinking behind. Because if you live it like just to iterate and to go further, you kind of like miss out on the thinking. So I do agree that AI it's helpful, but it should be controlled up to a point where it's not taking decisions for the people. And that's something that it's tricky, right? Because you want to be more efficient in a way with everything. And that comes with trade-offs.
So, in my view, efficiency actually drives standardization, a focus on output, a focus on, saying what have you done, the metrics, etc. It works very well in certain, I would say, parts of the economy, but in education, I mean, and the state of, the world we are in, or the engagement of the youth in their own future, I would say that perhaps it has been counterproductive. So, which brings me to the next point, which is that, indigenous knowledge is inherently, open to what one would call misappropriation. Knowledge gets, just used by others exploitatively. So, I mean, one of the challenges of, this systemic change has been that if we bring in the indigenous wisdom, traditional knowledge into the digital economy, how do we ensure that there are boundaries? How do we ensure that the ownership lies within the community themselves? And how do we ensure that, they are the stewards of their own wisdom and they are able to, you know, transmit it to the future? Because that, in my mind, is actually, I think, the nub of, using AI for indigenous, for preservation of indigenous wisdom. It extends to languages, practices, ecological practices of, conservation, pretty much everything.
I
How
think
do
they
we
have to have
do that?
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Radhika. End of.
I was just saying, number one is they have to have a seat at the table at the top level in whoever's designing the systems, making decisions. It's as Diego said, just AI making decisions dangerous, but similarly, people who are not indigenous, which often happens, making decisions, what happens to indigenous knowledge is equally dangerous, perhaps even more. So I think them having a seat at the table and all those decisions, and from day one designing and co-creating those systems, right? Like in dialogues like this, even from the very early days, like I wish we had someone, I don't know if we do, but someone indigenous at the table, even at this level of ideation, because it's hard for those who are not to step in the shoes and even with good intentions, be the
True,
best steward.
true, true. So a seat at the table, at the decision table. That's, I mean, point number one. Anything else that we need to look at? Because as I'm going forward, I mean, this is a live project, so this is just not a dialogue. We are brainstorming here because the next step for me will be, as one of the stewards of this project, is to actually put together a working team. So, the voice at the decision table, which means voice at the conception or the conceptualization of the project, they need to be present. Is there anything else that we need to do to ensure that they have ownership?
I
Design.
think that
Ordinarily.
I think that the word ownership is very important, and it's that they have to be able to be owners of their knowledge. And I don't know how easy that is to protect once it's been incorporated into the system. If they want to take it back, if they don't want to participate anymore, I think those types of safeguards have to be put in place, so that they feel comfortable sharing and understanding that if it's not creating value, then they could potentially retire from the project. So that in essence, the knowledge is still theirs.
So the choice needs to be theirs. The choice to either participate or to withdraw.
And the power, right? To Nelly's point, the Uluru Rock example that I mentioned, that park is amazing. The cultural preservation is there of the rocks. They have a museum of indigenous heritage. What is most powerful is, after fighting for a while, the indigenous communities who lived there for thousands and tens of thousands of years actually have ownership of that land. They own the land, they own the park, they run the park, they decide which aspects of the culture they want to showcase in the museums. And that was a battle for them, but they won it. And that is different than any national park I've been to, because of that key factor, that the decision-making power and the ownership, to Nelly's point, I think, here, I amend what I said, not just as a seat at the table and more maximum power on decisions and what is done with that knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with it should be like the leadership and basically people like us helping to translate that kind of indigenous knowledge. But yeah, I agree with it's not only the ownership, but them actually leading that table. because they have been doing it for quite a while. So that's looking at things like growing into how as humans, we've been trying to change how natural systems work. We've been like playing with genetically modify things, and we know that doesn't end well because it's like things that were not supposed to happen that way, and it's so complex that we think that we can actually reproduce something that it's actually way more complex that we understand. So that's I think that's respecting that principle of respecting nature is something that from our perspective I always look up to the indigenous communities and when I go and see how they look at nature.
To that question you had, Shobha, on the earlier slide, I think, are they learners or educators? I think both, but particularly in this context, they are the teachers, right? In a sense, to Diago's point. They also have stayed kind of a slower pace of life to reflect and absorb and connect. We have lost it in our race here in the modern world to go fast, 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 right? And so in that sense also, they are, I think for something like this, they would be the ones that we learn from, and the AI is just a tool to codify it and capture it and share it.
Okay. The other question, I mean, I have this is rather reflective, and we have just another 2 minutes or so. Is it what if they say no? I mean, like you said, we are all good intentions, and sometimes good intentions, pave the way to hell. So, what if they say no? What do we do then?
Respect the no, and see if there's some others who want to share, right? It is their knowledge, and or try and make them see the value in sharing it, but convince them. If they say no, there have to be reasons, right? And maybe we haven't done a good job of convincing them their way of life will be protected and the knowledge will be protected. Find that, work with them until and if they come on board. Otherwise, respect and let them be is my reaction.
Of course, if they don't see value in it, I mean, they have the absolute choice to walk away from it because they need to see the value in such a project, in such, an archival, in preservation. If they don't see that, I guess that would be the. So, my last question to all of you, and thank you very much for sharing your views, is what do you think? You know, I mean, I'm just not going to do it. What do you think we can be the starting point of are the one value which an indigenous community might see if we were to approach them with such a project?
Well, one value is that indigenous communities often are also being left behind in the way we think of in the modern world, right? And the value to them, like the Copacabana example, that some of the new techniques, seeing that the best of what they have ancestral knowledge and new techniques, how it could help their community, their agency. And then the second key point is trying to convince them that if we all don't learn to live the way they live, we may not have a world to live in anymore. We are racing towards unsustainability, and with greenhouse gas issues, we may have no planet at all. We are all in this together. Kind of have that dialogue and convince them to come on board as teachers, both for the incentives for their well-being, but we as a world are in this together, and we have a crisis if we don't do something drastically different.